From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Kamala Harris gives her first big interview since securing the Democratic nomination, a CNN 2-on-1 with her running mate, Tim Walz. How did she do, and did the public learn anything new about how she intends to govern if she's elected to the Oval Office? Meantime, Donald Trump says again that he opposes Florida's 6-week abortion ban, but promises free IVF in vitro fertilization if he wins the White House in November. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Bill McGurn and editorial board member Kate Batchelder Odell. The early ratings are in, and about 6 million people watched the CNN interview with Kamala Harris, according to Nielsen, which is not a debate audience, but maybe a pretty good crowd for a random Thursday night. Let's start with a clip of Harris tangling with host Dana Bash about the economy, Bidenomics, and why she hasn't achieved more in the past 3.5 years as vice president.
We had to recover as an economy, and we have done that. And I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%. The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened. We did it.
Bill, what did you make of the interview? I guess my read is that the Harris headquarters camp is probably pretty pleased about this. No big meltdowns, no big boo-boos, and a little bit of personality shown by the vice president and her new running mate.
Yeah, the short answer is I believe she did very well last night in presenting herself. And I also believe we learned absolutely nothing from the interview, which I think was their goal. They didn't want to say anything. It's a low bar for the vice president. They want to avoid a stumble or a gaffe or something like with her interview with Lester Holt a few years ago, where she really botched her answer on going to the border.
Let's listen to Harris talking about her past positions. This is Dana Bash pushing her on whether she has changed her position on banning fracking, which she called for in 2019.
My values have not changed. I believe it is very important that we take seriously what we must do to guard against what is a clear crisis in terms of the climate.
Was there some policy or scientific data that you saw that you said, oh, okay, I get it now?
What I have seen is that we can grow and we can increase a thriving clean energy economy without banning fracking.
Kate, what do you make of this? To my eye, I can only imagine that this line, that my values have not changed, must have been workshopped in the Harris headquarters, because she said it, or words to that effect, more than once. And yet it's not a repudiation of any of those past stances. And so it almost looks to me like it is intended to be reassuring to swing voters, while it pitched as kind of a wink to progressive voters on the left. It suggests to me that the Kamala Harris, whose values told her in 2019 that it was the good idea to abolish private health insurance, if those values haven't changed, then it suggests to me that this is all a matter of tactics.
Right. I mean, keep in mind how we got to this point on Thursday. She declined to do an interview for several weeks, and weeks ago said she was going to do one by the end of the month, which a deadline that she just barely managed to make. What we've had is her campaign surrogates saying to the press that she disavows her past stances, for instance, on fracking, without any further scrutiny or explanation or requiring her to justify that. And so I think she did very little of that in this interview, and that I completely agree that my values have not changed is a fudge. And when she was asked about fracking, she basically said it's 2024 and I don't support it anymore. And I don't think that's a satisfying answer. I think that people will find in it whatever they want to find, but I do think that for Trump, it is something that he is starting to exploit, and it's probably wise of him politically to do so, to keep running the cut of her saying my values have not changed, because she's on the record supporting so many progressive ideas. And you mentioned single-payer healthcare, supporting Bernie Sanders' bill to set up a Medicare for all system, enormous cash payments through the welfare state. I mean, she's been on board for a lot of different progressive projects. And what she's trying to tell the left is that they can feel comfortable voting for her because she still believes those things, but she also just wants to win over the moderate voters that she needs to win. So I think that is going to be a high tightrope for her to walk. And I think Trump's right to start trying to exploit that.
Bill, what do you make of this? And on the point about an opening potentially for Trump here is a piece of his Truth Social yesterday. He said he saw Harris's answer to a very weakly phrased question, a question that was put in more as a matter of defense than curiosity. But her answer rambled incoherently and declared that her values haven't changed. On that, I agree. Her values haven't changed. And then he goes through a few things, including the border is going to remain open, he says, gun confiscation, zero fracking, private healthcare will be abolished, and so forth. But I think he has an opportunity here if he can stay on that message to put her on the defense. What does it mean if your values haven't changed? And you're not really repudiating or explaining why your views on these positions from 2019, 2020, why they are not still your positions.
Well, part of the reason is we know why she changed. She was a candidate running for president coming from California, where when she was in the Senate, she was to the left of Bernie Sanders, right? And then she ran for president. She lost that, but she's selected as vice president. And right now in this election year, she realizes, gee, Pennsylvania is key to my victory if I'm going to win. And Pennsylvania has fracking, so I can't say what I'm all about. I agree with you that it's kind of a wink to other Democrats. It begged for a follow-up question because you don't have to ban fracking to eliminate it. You can regulate it to death, put limits everywhere else in the supply chain. And second thing, I agree with Kate. She mentioned fracking and Trump can exploit it with her words. I think the most powerful thing for Trump to do is run ads featuring Kamala Harris, not himself, and just giving two sides and saying, come on, Kamala, which is it? And I think you can do that on a host of issues from the border to fracking to the economy. I think they would be very powerful in the swing states.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Here's another point of the CNN interview with Kamala Harris that is getting some attention. Listen to this.
Will you appoint a Republican to your cabinet?
Yes, I would.
Anyone
yes,
in mind?
I would. No one in particular in mind. We got 68 days to go with this election, so I'm not putting the cart before the horse, but I would. I think it's really important. I have spent my career inviting diversity of opinion. I think it's important to have people at the table when some of the most important decisions are being made that have different views.
And here is J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate, matching that pledge on Fox and Friends this morning, Friday morning.
Would you guys appoint a Democrat to your cabinet?
Oh, of course we would, Stephen. We've actually got a lot of great Democratic support. We just got RFK, of course, Tulsi Gabbard, who endorsed the president in just the last couple of days. If you look at the Trump movement in 2024, it's actually the common sense big tent movement in American politics. We don't agree on everything, of course. Not everybody who votes for Donald Trump is going to agree with every policy issue, but we agree on the basics.
Kate, what do you make of this? I guess I have a couple thoughts. One is that I'm generally skeptical of this kind of thing because people end up in these two political parties because they have real fundamental underlying disagreements about the direction that policy should go, bigger government or smaller government, higher taxes or lower taxes, and so on. So the idea that Kamala Harris is going to appoint some Republican to some position, I don't know, housing and urban development secretary that is either unimportant or where he's going to be expected to implement a policy that is not the way that the Republicans would run that agency. I don't know why anybody in the middle would feel encouraged by that development. On the other hand, Donald Trump strikes me as more ideologically flexible. He has been out and about the recent days with not only RFK Jr., but also Tulsi Gabbard. And maybe he would put somebody like Gabbard in his cabinet in a place where she can really make her influence felt.
I think it is, first of all, hard to see any Republican of consequence in a Harris cabinet. I mean, he uses the example of HUD, but keep in mind the housing policies Harris has been proposing. She's endorsed basically the Biden rent control plan, which is panned by economists of every stripe. And she's been pumping a $25,000 home buying subsidy that would basically drive up the prices of houses. So even on some of these cabinet agencies that seem tertiary, I mean, the difference in visions, as you describe it, is substantial. I do take Vance more seriously that the Trump campaign is considering Democrats for its cabinet, but I don't consider that necessarily to their political credit. The Tulsi Gabbard endorsement has been hard for me to understand, given how much of what Trump did in his first term, especially on world affairs, she opposed. She is not a fan of his tough on China approach, and she panned his decision to leave the INF treaty that we have with Russia. She's now a huge critic of Ukraine. I mean, so I suppose that is where some of the convergence lies. But Donald Trump is courting more of these sort of disaffected Democrats, but also bringing in some of their views, which is hard for me to understand. And I don't think that is necessarily a winner for him. I think, if anything, the problem for Trump might be that he's not doing anything to try to get the Republican primary voters who preferred Nikki Haley, of which there was a substantial chunk. And so going the Tulsi direction, I think there is potentially a risk for him, as it's this election. If you look back to 2016 and how few votes it came down to in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, I mean, it's a close run thing. You need every one of them. So I do think it's plausible that Donald Trump could have Democrats in his cabinet, but I wouldn't exactly express too much excitement about that.
But he seems to be making a conscious effort to reach out beyond the Republican base. It suggests to me that he is aware of recent polls, including the national ones and including in some of these swing states, that show him a point or a couple points or even several points behind Kamala Harris. And he is working feverishly to try to expand his coalition as we get within 60 days here coming up of the November election. And one other notable place where he is moving a little bit, Bill, is abortion. Donald Trump is a Florida resident now. Florida has a 6-week restriction on abortions. And on the ballot this November is going to be Amendment 4. Here is the summary of it from the Florida Division of Elections. It says, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. And so it is going to be pitched, as recent ballot initiatives in other states have been, as restoring or codifying a Roe v. Wade standard, though the critics will say that, especially in that piece about protecting the patient's health, which is typically undefined, it probably goes beyond Roe v. Wade. And this week, Trump was asked about his position on that amendment. Here's what he said: I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks, unquote, which was taken as an endorsement of this Amendment 4 that is going to be on the ballot. The Trump campaign then came in and was cleaning up after that a bit, saying that he is not saying how he intends to vote on his own ballot. He is only saying what he has said before, which he says that 6 weeks is not enough access to abortion. And Bill, I asked on a podcast a couple of days ago some of our other colleagues this question of whether Trump is at risk of losing elements of the pro-life Republican base that have supported Republican candidates for years and for decades. And let me put that question to you, noting that your column this week is under the headline, Confessions of a Pro-Lifer.
Okay, well, I answer it in two ways. First, your general question about reaching out to other constituencies. I think Trump has done a good job of that. Hispanics, African-American men, and so forth. He's done a good job, but when he does a good job, it's largely the fact of going to those groups, taking them seriously, and trying to explain how the classic principles of the Republican Party would be more beneficial to them than the Democrat prescriptions. And he has a record showing that that's true. So that's in the abstract. I like Kate, the bipartisan zeal over someone of the other party in a cabinet. I don't think that matters. Of course, if they shared your principles, But if they're just going to be for show and we're going to have Democratic policy in a Republican administration or Republican policy in a Democratic administration just to prove it's bipartisan, that's incoherent. I think the voters care whether it's bipartisan or not. On abortion, when I wrote my column, Trump hadn't given his latest news on Florida and so forth. I think he also promised free IVF. Pro-lifers have a problem with that because there are embryos left over that are discarded. That said, I think the problem with the president and J.D. Vance is the political problem is what they're doing is not going to get them a single pro-choice vote. And it is alienating pro-life leaders. I think Trump believes that he can take them for granted because the Democratic Party is worse. I'm not sure that's a right calculation. The second problem with his positions, they're incoherent. He seems to be floundering for a position. I know he wants to say he's not for a federal ban, as Democrats have accused him of. That's a perfectly reasonable position. I'm pro-life. I'm not for a federal ban. I think you could say, I oppose a national ban on this. The country is very divided, and I think the people of Louisiana should decide what abortion is in their state, and the people in New York and California may have a different view. That's how our system is set up. Instead, you have him making these statements that all they do is suggest he has no principles. And I was surprised to see J.D. Vance weigh in on that about a week ago, I think, in his comments. You know, he said he would support vetoing a national ban if the American people, through the Congress, presented one to him. I think that's insane, that kind of talk. What he should have said, it's a BS question for reasons Nikki Haley pointed out in one of the debates. Congress is not going to pass a pro-life law in any time soon. Just don't have the votes to overcome a filibuster and so forth. And meanwhile, it's the Democrats who are trying to codify the issue. And the final thing is that there are a host of abortion-related issues. Biden had a lot of executive orders. There's no question that a Harris administration would be far more pro-abortion than a Trump administration, although Trump is muddying the water.